The great story about steel that too few people know is that it can be endlessly recycled. Steel that you make out of old steel is as good as the steel was before. There's no degradation in quality.
What's the story of American steel that really needs to be heard most right now?
The story of American steel is...
Meet Gregg Walker, Senior Director of Communications at the Steel Manufacturers Association. After nearly 3 decades in nonprofit communications, he's become one of the leading voices explaining how American steel is evolving through innovation, sustainability, safety, and advanced manufacturing.
People are amazed when they learn how much steel goes into a data center. Today, it's more than 70% of the steel made in America, and within a few years will be much higher than that. Everything at a steel mill is heavy, sharp, and hot. The farther you can keep people away, the safer you can keep them. Our members don't compete on safety. Instead, they collaborate on safety. Big manufacturers, but especially steel makers, have been using artificial intelligence and its predecessor technologies for years, mainly in safety.
How do you see that technology playing in the future for the steel manufacturing?
The industry will tell you that
Steel is one of the most essential industries in America, but it's also amongst the most misunderstood. Most people don't think about who makes their steel. Behind every piece of infrastructure in this country, there are facilities full of people doing incredibly demanding work and an industry that has spent decades figuring out how to do it better and safer. I'm Julia Dubois, CEO of TenForce, and this is the Pragmatic Safety Podcast, where hands-on leaders with decades of experience show us how to make safety more practical. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the American steel industry, including the things driving it forward and where it's going next. And it's time to get to work. Welcome to the Pragmatic Safety Podcast. On this show, we get into safety culture, what it takes to lead in high-risk environments, and how technology and sustainability fit into the picture. Today, we're talking to someone who can tell us the story of the steel industry. Because if you want to understand where safety and innovation in American steel are headed, it helps to talk to someone who has a view across all of it. Gregg Walker is the Senior Director of Communication at the Steel Manufacturers Association, the trade group representing the electric arc furnace steelmakers who produce more than 70% of the steel made in the United States. He spent nearly 30 years in nonprofit communication, and for the last 3 years, he's been telling the story of America's most important industries. Welcome to the podcast, Gregg. So Gregg, let's start with your journey. You've spent nearly 30 years working in nonprofit communication. What drew you to the steel industry?
Yeah. Well, working in nonprofit communications is a great fit for somebody like me. I want to learn as much as I can about everything. And over the course of 30 years, I've had the pleasure of working with police chiefs from around the world, propane dealers from around the United States, makers of high-tech ceramics for space shuttles, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and mechanical engineers, and you name it, just soaking up as much of that information as I could. But I'd never encountered an industry that I like quite as well as I like the steel industry. It's absolutely essential for just about everything else we do in America and around the world. Without steel, there's no national security, no energy security, a lot less infrastructure, a lot less employment, communities that aren't quite as robust or prosperous. Steel makes everything better, right? Steel builds American families, American communities, American cities. Steel built the United States and continues to drive progress. It's a real pleasure working in this industry, in other words.
Yeah, sounds really fascinating. You're known to be quite a storyteller. So what's the story of American steel that really needs to be heard most right now for you?
Yeah, no, thank you for asking. The story of American steel is one of innovation, right? Some folks from outside the industry may not know that there are 2 major ways to make steel. One of them is the older, less efficient method that involves blast furnaces and basic oxygen furnaces. And when a lot of Americans think about steel, they really have in mind those old blast furnace integrated steelmaking technologies. Those are really raw material intensive. They involve a lot of coal and coke and iron ore. They require a lot of mining. They produce a lot of carbon emissions. But American steel started innovating decades ago. And today, most of the steel made in America gets made in a much more efficient, low emissions, safer way called electric arc furnaces. This is where a steel maker takes scrap iron and steel, melts it in an electric arc furnace, and then turns that into brand new steel. The great story about steel that too few people know is that it can be endlessly recycled. Steel that you make out of old steel is as good as the steel was before. There's no degradation in quality, which means that after a building or an automobile or a locomotive or a ship reaches the end of its useful life, you can cut it into pieces, melt it down, and make something brand new out of it, endlessly. Our members all make steel that way in electric arc furnaces. That means that they are recovering tens of millions of tons of steel every year that would otherwise end up in landfills or even worse in streams and lakes and rivers. And they're taking that steel and turning it into something brand new. And that method of making steel, as I said a moment ago, is much less carbon intensive, much lower emissions. It requires less energy. It's really a remarkable story. And American steelmakers have a lot to be proud of when it comes to innovation.
Oh, it's great. And when did this transition start?
Yeah, many decades ago.
Many decades ago. Okay. And it's still innovating and it's still progressing, and we have new technologies coming in every day.
When the Steel Manufacturers Association was founded in 1988, EAF steel accounted for about half the steel made in America.
Okay.
Today, it's more than 70% of the steel made in America. And within a few years, will be much higher than that. This is just the cleanest, most efficient, best way to make steel. And American steelmakers are poised to do just that.
Okay. And I keep on hearing about green steel.
Yeah.
Is that part of that transformation as well?
It is. Steelmaking is a major global industry, and it has a reputation for producing a lot of carbon emissions. And there's a question of how do we make that industry cleaner, right? There's no way the countries of the world will come together to reach our emissions targets in time without reducing carbon emissions in the steel industry. And because it's an innovative industry, steelmakers around the world, policymakers around the world are pursuing new ways to make steel that produces less carbon emissions.
Yeah.
The good news is we already have electric arc furnace steel making, and the rest of the world is moving very quickly, not quickly enough, but they're trying to move quickly to make their steel industries look like ours, because EAF steelmaking is the way to go.
Okay. And so the SMA Plan for American Power and the Global Steel Climate Council, they are both very big initiatives at the moment. Can you explain a little bit what it means in practical terms for the people working in these facilities?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. The Global Steel Climate Council was created in 2022 by the Steel Manufacturers Association, several of its members, and many other companies around the world to help people figure out that question. How do I know what the emissions profile is of the steel I'm buying? And if I'm choosing between two steel products from two different producers, how do I know which one has less embodied carbon in its production? The Global Steel Climate Council created what's called the Steel Climate Standard, which is science-based. It is process agnostic. It makes no allowances, no special allowances for the steel-making route, as we would say. It reflects the understanding that if we're going to hit our emissions targets by, say, 2050, all of the steel we make is going to have to fall under that glide path of low emissions. That means that everybody's going to have to get cleaner in the next 20 years. There are dozens and dozens of groups out there that claim to have a definition and a certification for clean steel or green steel. The problem is almost all of them muddy the water with other important but not really emissions specific criteria, like how equitably you treat questions of community activity or something like that, right? All are noble, worthwhile pursuits, but they don't say anything about the emissions associated with the steel you're making. The Steel Climate Standard is just about the emissions. It's one of the few standards out there that requires third-party verification. So today, the Global Steel Climate Council has 21 steel-producing members from around the world. 3 of them have already gotten steel products certified under the Steel Climate Standard, which means that third-party disinterested verifiers have validated those emissions claims and verified that the steel does in fact meet the Steel Climate Standard. Another 5 companies from outside the United States have gotten their science-based emissions targets certified under the Steel Climate Standard, and they're working on getting their products certified. Now, the 3 companies that have got their products certified so far, they're all SMA members, I'm happy to say. But every steel maker in the world, no matter how they're making their steel, can get on this glide path and reduce their emissions sufficiently to hit the target that the world has set for 2050. So we're really excited about the Global Steel Climate Council, and I would invite anybody who knows anybody who buys steel to look into the Steel Climate Standard, just so you know what you're buying.
Yeah, definitely. I will definitely dig deeper into that myself.
You mentioned the SMA Plan for American Power, and that's an important initiative too, so I'm glad you mentioned it.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Tell me more about it.
It's brand new. It came out just a few weeks ago. It was profiled recently in the Wall Street Journal, I'm happy to say. It basically acknowledges that in America, as we electrify more things, including our steel making, and as we add additional demand to the grid in the form of, say, data centers, it's becoming quite clear that we have to move a little faster than we thought to generate enough electricity and distribute it in a way that is affordable and reliable and dispatchable, as they say. So we've made some recommendations, and we hope the Trump administration and the Congress take them very seriously. In a nutshell, they are: 1, we've got to fix permitting, because it's really difficult for a manufacturer of any scale to get the necessary permits for a project. And the same is true for people who are building electricity infrastructure. It's really hard to get new power plants and additional grid components permitted in a reasonable amount of time. So that's not only delaying the arrival of all the electricity we need, but it's discouraging investment, right? America has moved an admirable way to retire power plants that are nearing the end of their lives or are maybe not hitting the emissions targets that we all know we need to hit. The problem is we might be retiring some of them a little bit too soon, before we can replace their electricity on the grid. So we need to pause that, right? If we can make the case that a power generation facility is not necessarily ready for retirement, we should keep it online a little bit longer to make sure we've got the power we need. We need the federal government to embrace policies that spur investment in electric generation and distribution. And then lastly, we've got to move to secure the supply chain for power generation and distribution. No country in the world has all of the basic materials necessary to produce and distribute all of the electricity they need, and the United States doesn't either, right? We've got a supply chain for power that has to draw on sources from around the world. We need to take steps to secure those supply chains. And of course, if anybody's interested, we'd be happy to talk with them more about what that might look like. But we really hope the government embraces this plan for American power, because a lot of people need a lot of electricity, and the competition for power is going up all the time, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, I know the data centers are growing everywhere. They are taking a lot of capacity, and yeah, I don't think it's going to slow down just yet. So the demand, at least. So let's make sure we can supply. The steel industry is a heavy industry. So we talked about the emissions, the climate, the impact it can have, the sustainability, but there's a big safety component as well. It has evolved a lot. And I know that the safety committee from the SMA recognized recently 7 steelmakers who operated 28 facilities with 0 lost time injury last year, which is quite an incredible number and an incredible achievement. What does it take to get to that level? And what lessons the industry learn from them?
Yeah, no, that's terrific. Those are the questions that we ask ourselves and the safety professionals from our member companies all the time, right? The good news is that steel mills around the world have gotten safer every year. And in the United States, the rate of improvement is even higher. When I talk to some old time steelmakers about the way the safety record has changed, they are just delighted at the progress we've made. But of course, nobody is satisfied with that, right? If our members operate 28 facilities that in 2025 had no lost time due to injuries, well, that means that they've got a lot of other facilities where there was lost time due to injuries, and they won't be satisfied until all their facilities are hitting that mark. But when I ask them, what does it take to see that kind of improvement and what will it take to improve even more, they're pretty clear, right? It requires a company-wide commitment to safety. And it is not treating safety as a priority. It is making sure that every single thing you do safely every day, every shift, right? All of our member companies are committed to making sure everybody goes home after a shift safe and healthy, in as good a shape as they were when they arrived. And that requires constant attention to safety. They've all learned that you can't take it for granted. And so that's why one of our biggest and most active committees at the Steel Manufacturers Association is the SMA Safety Committee. We meet twice a year in person and meet frequently for webinars and other virtual conversations about safety because our members don't compete on safety. Instead, they collaborate on safety. And one of the pleasures of working with that group is seeing how they come together to share good ideas. They take those back to their companies and they improve lives as a result. Can I tell you one story about that specifically?
Of course. Go ahead.
The safety committee met in New Orleans last year. Some safety professionals on our transportation committee met in New Orleans last year. And one of the tours we undertook was a tour of the Domino Sugar Refinery right there in downtown New Orleans. I'm told it's the biggest sugar refinery in the Western Hemisphere. And it was eye-opening, to be sure, right? But one of our members, while we were on the tour, saw some employees at the sugar refinery using handheld scanners to track the movement of equipment and products around the facility. But he was struck by how far away they were standing from the stuff they were scanning. So he asked some questions, took some notes. He told us recently, a year later, that he learned that the sugar refinery had long-range handheld scanners. And he very quickly tried them out at his steel mill, where, of course, they had been scanning equipment and products for a long time. But now his colleagues were able to stand much farther away from stuff that they were scanning. And the saying on the safety committee is that everything at a steel mill is heavy, sharp, and hot. The farther you can keep people away from stuff that's heavy, sharp, and hot, the safer you can keep them. Well, the trial went very well, and they've now adopted those long-range scanners at that mill. And he told us a couple of months ago that he thinks they're safer as a result. And I'm delighted because that came out of an SMA committee meeting and a tour, right? You might think, what can a steelmaker learn at a sugar refinery? But we learned something good that day for sure.
Yeah. There's always something to learn. Yeah, I want to bounce on what you say. If safety is a priority, it's just something that you must do. If safety becomes really embedded in your culture, that's the way you do things. And I think that yield very different results for all the industry in general. So I like the fact that the difference between safety as a priority versus safety culture, which I think is the only way that we make long lasting progresses in that field.
I wholeheartedly agree. As they say, if safety is a priority, well, priorities change, right?
Yes.
So you just, as you say, you just weave safety into everything you do.
Yeah, that's very important. That brings also a very human aspect of safety and the SMA Transportation and Environmental Committee. You recently partnered with the Rock Solid Foundation. Can you tell us a little bit more what that partnership? Because for me, when I read about it, it was really a very human and heartwarming story, and I would like you to tell us about it.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a departure for us. And it brought so much of my work at SMA to bear on a single project, including my communications work. But yeah, as you say, we took a couple of committees to Columbia, South Carolina a few months ago. And the meeting was a smashing success, I'm pleased to say, in all of the usual ways. But we did something a little different this time, right? At the reception that we always hold to kick off our committee meetings, we partnered with an organization called the Rock Solid Foundation, that's ROC Solid Foundation, to put together a backyard play set for a local family battling pediatric cancer. I didn't know any of this a few months ago, but about 16,000 kids in America get a cancer diagnosis every year. And one of the things that they have to deal with after that is to avoid infections or any of the kind of common illnesses that are inconvenient for most of us, but can be deadly for somebody undergoing treatment for cancer. They can't go to the playground anymore. And so if they don't have a play set in the backyard, well, they're really, they're missing out on an important part of childhood. So while our committee members did their usual hanging out and having some refreshments, they also put together this big, cool play set. And afterward, the family of a little girl named Ellis, who has a kind of leukemia, came to the convention center for the big reveal. And she and her brother and sister and some family friends all got to play on the equipment for a while. Immediately afterward, the folks from the Rock Solid Foundation broke it into a few different pieces and took it to Ellis's house. And it was assembled and landscaped in her backyard before she woke up the next morning. And I was really moved by how moved our steelmaking committee members were. For a lot of them, this was a major highlight. And for the last couple of months, they've been asking me, what are we going to do next time, right? Because they are insisting that we do some kind of community service project at all of our meetings from now on. It turns out that's a real part of steelmaking culture that I've been pleased to learn about. Steel mills are terrific neighbors. They typically are the biggest and best employers in their area, often in rural America. They pay the best wages, have the best benefits packages, and they really look out for their communities. And so they regularly engage in this kind of work. In fact, when I shared this story recently with the HR committee, I'm talking a lot about committees, thanks for bearing with me. When I talked about this with the Human Resources Committee, they loved it so much, we had to do a webinar introducing the Rock Solid Foundation to these steelmaking companies that didn't know about it yet. And of course, many of them are busy making their plans, right? This is less about the Rock Solid Foundation as far as I'm concerned, and more about the generosity of spirit that I see in this industry. And for me, it was a career highlight. And I'm looking forward to what we can come up with next, right?
Yeah, but that gives a very human, and I like what you say about the community driven of the steel industry in general. It's been there for a very long time. It has evolved, but this sticking together, this community approach seems to be very important, and I think it's quite international as well across the different steel industry in different regions. And that's also why I think the safety culture is important in the steel industry because it's a big family. Um, Today, what are the messages the steel makers will respond most to, according to you? What are they driving towards? What's the most important for them?
Yeah. We actually know from research done by the World Steel Association that every few years gets a snapshot of global attitudes about steel and the steel industry. We have a sense now of what people around the world and people here in the United States think about our industry and what kind of messages they're connecting with. So I'll start there if you don't mind. The research shows that in the last 4 years, steel's reputation, especially in the United States, has improved. A greater share of Americans today are likelier to say that steel makers are innovative, they're safe, they're sources of good jobs, and they make a product that's essential for national security. Now, that increase coincides more or less with my time doing communications at SMA. So I would like to think that I've had at least a tiny little part in that. But
I'm
clearly
sure.
that story's getting out. But the other thing that comes out of the research is that we've got to do a better job of telling our own industry first, and then the broader steel buying public more about our recycling story, right? They are more likely to agree now that we are improving our emissions profile. That's absolutely true. It's an important part of our story. But too few Americans, too few people around the world know how we're keeping the planet a little bit cleaner by reusing old steel and iron. And that really resonates with our members because that's how they go about their business. And they're more inclined now to talk about that. And so we're helping with that, right? But we're also working to do a better job of telling the wider world that the steel industry is a good place to work. When you talk to people about steel and what images they have associated with it, they generally are thinking of an old integrated steel mill in a big industrial area from decades ago or centuries ago, right? They'll tell you about, people shoveling coal into, roaring fires. And that's not at all what a modern steel mill looks like. If you work at a modern steel mill run by one of our members, chances are you're doing most of your work at a computer in a pulpit where you're shielded from the stuff that's hot and sharp and heavy. And you are less a strong back and more a sharp mind, right? You are a scientist, an engineer. There is still an element of the job that requires some tolerance for working in the cold, working in the heat, handling a massive product. But really, it is high-tech work. And we've got to do a better job of telling that story. That's one of the things I like about working with associate members like TenForce is that you guys are at the leading edge of technology. And you don't sell steel mills pickaxes, right? You sell stuff that is 21st century bordering on 22nd century, right?
We try. We just want to make sure everybody is safer and come home safely.
That's great. We can agree on that.
Yes, definitely. I think safety is key. We have seen lately in the media a shift on the communication around steelmakers, and the focus has been shifting from sustainability to trade. What does this change tell us about the direction the industry is taking? What are the big changes you foresee or expect in the coming years, I would say?
Yeah, boy, you're absolutely right about that change. When I first started working in the steel industry 3.5 years ago, where I do mainly media relations and other kinds of communications work, what the world wanted to talk about was sustainability, right? What is the steel industry doing to improve its emissions profile? And of course, we've got a really good story to tell at SMA, so I liked that kind of work. But that changed a lot, for reasons you can imagine in the last 12 or 18 months. And now when reporters call, and they call a lot, they really want to talk about trade. And that's because, the United States is the biggest importer of steel in the world. We use more than 100 million tons of steel here every year, and we produce a little more than 80 million tons. We also export a little bit. So that means that we are importing something in the neighborhood of 25 million tons of steel a year. If you are a steel maker elsewhere in the world, you want to get into this market. And there are some parts of the world where they make steel products exclusively for American use, right? Stuff that they don't use in their own countries or their own regions. But they know we buy a lot of steel and they want to serve that market. Well, what has happened in recent years is that the market for steel has gotten very distorted. And American policymakers have been trying to rationalize the steel market in a way that makes sense for the United States and the wider region, and ultimately for the whole planet. Our members remain every bit as committed to sustainability as they were, but right now we are addressing this matter of trade in a very serious way. There are big producers of steel around the world who make heavily subsidized steel that they are willing to sell below market value, and they produce an awful lot of the steel. And when that floods our shores, it really distorts the market. It makes it hard for an American steel company to compete, right? American steel companies want to pay a decent wage. They want to meet all of the environmental, even to exceed environmental requirements, to invest heavily in safety, right? They want to do things the right way. They want to take care of the local community. Well, that's hard to do when unfairly traded steel is undercutting you to the extent that it's really in danger of forcing you out of the market. Some people around the world, and maybe even some viewers of this podcast, might not be aware that global steel production has soared in the last 20 years. In 2005, worldwide, human beings made about 800 million tons of steel. In 2021 or 2022, steel production hit a peak of nearly 2 billion tons of steel. What a lot of people don't know is that more than half of that steel is made in China. China is the world's leading producer of steel at about 1 billion tons every year, but they don't use that much. They export 135 million tons into the steel market globally. Number 2 on the list is India, who makes about 150 million tons. So India makes about what China exports. And last year, for the first time in 25 years, the United States leapfrogged Japan to become the 3rd leading producer of steel in the world at about 81.5 million tons, right? China makes as much steel in a month as the United States makes in a year. China makes as much steel in 12 days as all of the steel makers in Latin America make in a year. And China, at about 2.5 million tons of steel a day, makes as much steel in one day as the United Kingdom made all of last year. That kind of production threatens to distort the market, right? If China is exporting 135 million tons, many of it sold below cost because their mills don't have to make a profit. They're subsidized by the government. That hurts the United States, where we make just a little more than half that much in total, right? So anyway, the measures that we have taken, we think at SMA, especially the Section 232 tariff on imported steel for national security reasons, has been a success. Our steel production is up, imports are down, and the surest sign of success is that companies are investing in American steel making. Some of our biggest members have brand new mills opening in the next year or two, including 2 high-tech mills in West Virginia. And then foreign investment in American steelmaking is soaring. I'm sure just about everybody with an interest in this podcast knows that Asian companies have been investing heavily in steel production here, whether they're buying U.S. Steel, the company, or they're creating a new 3 million ton mill in Louisiana to serve some car makers in the Southeast. we are in the midst of a huge investment wave in American steelmaking, and we're here for it.
That's really great to hear. That also, for me, highlights the so many challenges that the industry is facing. Because we talked about the sustainability, and you still have some targets for 2050 or sooner, if we can, that everybody adheres to the sustainability, the emissions, making sure that we are good there. You have the safety. You don't want to go back to unsafe environments, so this keeps on going. And you have an increase in production, new sites being created, and that's a lot of pressure on the industry at the moment. What keeps you up at night the most at the moment?
Well, I would typically think of the stuff that you just listed, right? Those are the things that immediately came to mind for me. But I've had a chance to talk with a lot of steel executives, not just in the United States, but around the world. And lately, they have all been saying the same thing. Their top challenge is not technology or emissions or raw materials, maybe not even trade. They say that their top challenge is recruiting and retaining the best talent they can get. That it's a tough job market for manufacturers because after decades in the United States, especially, and probably all over the Western world for sure, we have kind of devalued manufacturing jobs. Not just because there are fewer of them now than there may have been a few generations ago, but also because we've taught generations of kids in America and elsewhere that they should be pursuing white-collar jobs. And there may even be a kind of stigma attached to manufacturing jobs, which does not fit the facts. Because as I said a moment ago, in just about every community where a steel mill operates, it is paying the highest wages in that area. It has the best benefits packages. It's got a great working environment, right? It is safer than ever before. It is still fascinating and interesting and cool. If you haven't been to a steel mill, give us a call. Maybe we can figure out a way, because it's one of the coolest things you'll ever see. But it's a real challenge for steelmakers and many other manufacturers to find enough young people to fill today's jobs, to make sure that we've got enough people to make tomorrow's steel. And what it means is that steelmakers who are already great employers are investing heavily in that, right? They want to make that employment experience just as good as possible. So they invest very heavily in their people, right? If you want a job where you're going to get professional development, where you're going to have an opportunity to do a variety of things, where you can feel like you're making a difference and being a part of something bigger than yourself, well, steelmaking is a very good candidate for that. So I find myself worried about that as much as anything else lately. That's part of the reason I think the communications work we do in the steel industry is so important, because we have the ability to shape people's perceptions of the industry and what it's like to work in it. And we've got to do a better job of that than we have been, right? We've got to correct those misunderstandings and make sure the most talented young engineers and tradespeople and folks working in many other disciplines give steel mills a try, because they're really cool.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it's a very dynamic industry as well, even though it feels like a heavy lifting. I feel there's a lot of innovation going on. And as you said, I've visited all kind of mills, the old-fashioned ones. I also visited some of the newer ones, and yeah, some of them you don't recognize. It's you could eat from the floor, I would say. It's so clean, it's so high tech. You don't feel that you're in a steel manufacturing environment at that point. So it's quite impressive how it has evolved, and also how, yeah, innovation, new technology. But the sustainability for me was also quite something surprising initially, to see
Yeah.
how much solar and wind farms are attached to try to also to recycle the production. And I think that's important for the public to also know that, yeah, there's huge investment done in safety and sustainability in this environment,
Yeah.
and that what we think of steel mill from the whatever 19th, 20th century is not what we have today.
That's right.
And I'm from Europe, so we have the dark picture of the steel mills as well. It's quite present.
Yeah, that's right. I know that you're particularly interested in some high-tech stuff. And one of the things that I'd love for young people to understand is that if you are interested in cutting edge technology, like say artificial intelligence, the steel industry is the place to be for a couple of reasons. One, we will not have the AI infrastructure we require without steel. People are amazed when they learn how much steel goes into, say, a data center, how much steel is used to expand our energy infrastructure. And as we talked about earlier, we've got to build out our power generation and distribution system to meet our technology goals. And we've got to do it quickly. And that requires a lot of steel. If we're not making that steel, we've got to import it. That puts us at a big disadvantage, right? But I know that you in particular are interested in how mills are using technology today. Mills were among the earliest adopters of AI. And big manufacturers, but especially steel makers, have been using artificial intelligence and its, predecessor technologies for years, mainly in safety, right? They are always looking for ways to keep people out of harm's way, right? To automate things that can be automated, to free their teammates up to do higher level things, right? And they also, because they deal with millions of tons of scrap iron, they've been using AI for years to help them sort and arrange that raw material so that they get the right mix into the furnace to make whatever grade of steel they're making at that moment. The more efficiently they do that, the more efficient the operation is, right? Lower emissions, more dollars. So they are big believers in AI. But I've had the benefit of seeing ways that steel makers are adopting AI in surprising places, right? If you'll forgive me for saying so, at an SMA committee meeting in Houston, I brought in a local trainer who does AI for human resources. And so we got these SMA steelmaker human resources professionals into the room for a few hours to talk about how to do AI in their jobs. Because we just talked about that recruitment and retention challenge they face, and they want every tool they can get. And so they are trying artificial intelligence, right? So it's a kind of virtuous circle, right? The mills use AI to make the steel more efficiently, to recruit people more efficiently. And then the data centers are made of steel. The windmills and solar arrays are made of steel. And they produce the electricity that the mills use to melt the old steel, from, junk automobiles or buildings that are being torn down and replaced to make the steel that we need for the energy infrastructure. It's a pretty cool story.
Yeah, it's a nice circle. Now, AI is also evolving very fast. So I fully understand the early adoption of AI to identify, to sort, to automate. Now we're moving towards a world where AI also, seconds a bit the human, can make advice. How do you see that technology playing in the future for the steel manufacturing? Because it is a high risk industry. So I feel that the human judgment and the human component will always be a big part of it.
Yes.
Yet, how can AI support the best when we talk about maybe those different type agentic AI and other large models to help the steel manufacturing? And is the industry ready for it?
Yeah. The industry will tell you that they are not quite ready, right? I don't know that anybody ever feels that they're totally ready to make full use of the new technology, but they're working very hard to do it. Though, as you say, they have gotten quite adept collecting data and putting that data to good use. And they are learning how AI helps them do that, right? First in operations to make a better steel product more efficiently. And they've been using it to help keep people out of harm's way, right? AI can help them identify safety risks they didn't even see, right? And it can help them find those risks before there's an incident, before somebody gets hurt. But they're really looking for ways to use AI to free up their talented people to do higher level things. And that's exciting. And I'm excited to see where they take it.
Yeah, I think the advances in technology and in AI, as you say, I don't think anyone is ready for it in any industry. It's something new. It's moving at a pace that we have not seen in the past either in terms of innovation. I think at all level, be it the human being able to adapt, but also the software, the tools, the processes, everything will need some time to adjust. And as we said, we're in a high risk environment, and change management is also something we need to keep in mind. We cannot just bring in new technology, new concept without having it remaining safe and sustainable and maintainable for the future. So I think that's always a balance that the industry will have to figure out and to find, and adoption will go at the pace that the people can adopt, I think. And I think that's a key element there. But I like the fact that, indeed, human resources can help that. Data analysis, identification, those are things where probably will bring the most value the sooner.
I think that's right.
All right. Well, Gregg, it's been really a lot of fun having this discussion. I've learned a lot about the steel industry as well. And thank you for shaping it with a very human and collaborative and community-oriented face. I think it was really very interesting. If some of our listeners want to follow the work of SMA and they want to connect with you, where should they go?
Yeah. The easiest way is to start at our website, steelnet.org. We're the Steel Manufacturers Association. We represent about 24 steel producing companies and more than 60 associate members now, companies that provide goods and services to the mills. You can also reach me by email, walker@steelnet.org. I would encourage anybody to write with questions. I'm happy to chat. And of course, we've got a pretty good presence on social media. LinkedIn is a good place to keep track of us. So follow the Steel Manufacturers Association on LinkedIn, and let's talk.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time today. And I know we're heading into a long and festive weekend, so I hope you have some good and fun plan. And there's still quite some football, soccer to watch over the weekend. So I wish everybody a good luck, and may your team win, I would say.
That's great. Thank you so much, Julia. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Gregg. And that wraps up today's conversation. Thank you for tuning into the show where hands-on leaders with decades of experience show us how to make safety and environmental performance more practical. If you want to explore how TenForce helps industrial teams turn better processes into safer operations, visit tenforce.com or visit tenforce.com/podcast to explore more episodes and get practical resources you can use right away. We'll see you next time.